Open sores cover his body. Worms have embedded themselves into his pus-filled flesh. His feet are covered in blisters. On the verge of death, Yossi Ginsburg knows he must stimulate his body to continue pushing forward. He spots a nest of fire ants in the leaves of a tree, and moving underneath it begins to shake it violently. The furious ants rain down on him, angrily biting and chewing at his flesh. It's torture, but the bites also release bursts of steroids from his body's reserves, energizing him to continue moving, to not lay down and die. Things will soon get worse. The son of Holocaust survivors, Yossi Ginsburg enlisted with the Israeli Navy at the age of 19 to fulfill his mandatory military service in his home country of Israel. An adventurer at heart, Ginsburg dreamed of sailing the seven seas, but it wouldn't be until he completed his service in 1981 that he'd be free to travel past Israel's immediate territorial waters. Ginsburg was inspired by Papillon, written by Henri Charrière. In his autobiographical work, the novel details a purported escape from the French penal colony of Bagnes de Cayenne, a brutal prison off the coast of French Guiana, also known as Devil's Island. Charrière details his escape from this deadly prison and the subsequent adventures abroad that ensued, setting fire to Ginsburg's imagination. He too wanted dangerous adventures and the opportunity to visit uncontacted indigenous tribes in the deepest jungles of the world. Ginsburg made up his mind to save up enough money to embark on a legendary adventure to find Charrière himself, as well as the many uncontacted tribes he had detailed in his book. This would take him into the deepest, darkest parts of the Amazon. But this only heightened Ginsburg's anticipation. He worked every job he could, saving every shekel he earned in anticipation of his grand adventure. His first job was working construction in Norway, after which he flew to Alaska to join the dangerous fishing fleets of the legendary Bering Sea. After saving up a good chunk of money, Ginsburg drove from Alaska to the lower 48, stopping to visit the city of sin itself, Las Vegas. In just one very ill-advised night of gambling, Ginsburg lost almost everything he had, putting his dreams of Amazon travel in serious jeopardy. Ginsburg got turned onto a job in New York, however, working for a friend's uncle. From New York, he traveled to Africa for his new job, shipping old music records to be resold in African markets. While in Africa, Ginsburg slept inside the container of trucks he drove in order to save money and rebuild his savings. Unfortunately, Ginsburg discovered that just as he had saved enough money to embark on his adventure, Charrière had already died. Further dampening his spirits was the realization that the tribes he had longed to travel to and live amongst had already been officially contacted and brought into the fold of the modern world. Ginsburg's mind was made up, though. If his icon was dead and the tribes he longed to meet were already contacted, then he'd just travel deeper into the green inferno and discover new tribes. Ginsburg soon arrived in Venezuela, but was immediately discouraged by the discovery that government efforts across South America had brought previous uncontacted tribes into contact with the modern world. His disillusion growing by the day, he hitchhiked his way down to Colombia, where he boarded a ferry ride that would change his life forever. The captain of Ginsburg's ferry decided to abruptly turn around after being told that a passenger had just arrived and missed the boat. Had that ferry captain not turned around to pick up this straggler, Ginsburg's life may have perhaps been more peaceful than it would become. It certainly would have saved him a trip to the heart of hell itself. On the dock was a Swiss school teacher, Marcus Stamm. As the two chatted on their boat ride, they quickly struck up a friendship. Stamm was like Ginsburg, also an adventurous spirit, and enjoying the final few weeks of his year-long break from his job teaching in Switzerland. With no real destination in mind, Ginsburg was easily talked into crossing over to Bolivia, and the duo headed up to La Paz, the capital. There, the two new friends were approached by an Austrian traveler, Karl Ruprechter. At first, Ginsburg and Stamm were suspicious of this character, but then Ruprechter began weaving together a story they couldn't resist. He explained that he was a geologist in search of a secret gold hotspot deep in the Amazon. The location was completely uncharted and had been revealed to him by sources familiar with the still uncontacted indigenous tribe who lived there, the Taramonas people. A secret treasure? Uncharted territory? Uncontacted indigenous people? Ginsburg was sold, hook, line, and sinker. Begging Ruprechter to allow him and Stamm to join his expedition, Ruprechter quickly agreed. The two could not have known that Ruprechter was not, in fact, a geologist, but rather a wanted criminal and con man fleeing from the Austrian authorities. The group made the acquaintance of an American, Kevin Gale, who was traveling through South America on a quest to document the people and animals. An avid photographer, it didn't take much convincing for Ruprechter to talk Gale into joining them. Once more, the promise of grand adventure and sights no white man had seen before proved too powerful a lure to resist. The four traveled to the Tuichi River and then followed the river until arriving at a tribal village at the very edge of the known Amazon. There, they stocked up on supplies and spoke to the locals about their trip. The villagers were quick to dissuade the foursome from pushing further into the jungle, citing the many dangers, including the Taramonas people themselves. Nothing would stop the group's quest for riches and adventure though, and the four plunged forth into the thick Amazon jungle. It would be a trip they would quickly regret. The towering trees quickly grow so thickly together that they block out enough sun to leave the jungle below in a state of perpetual twilight. Vines and undergrowth choke the group's progress, forcing them to hack their way forward with machetes. Thick clouds of insects and poisonous snakes dog their every step. The treacherous jungle was seriously slowing their progress, and the supplies they brought with them began to run dangerously low. Within days, they run out completely. The group resorts to eating whatever they can forage. In the heart of the Amazon, however, there's surprisingly little readily available food, unless you have the skill and knowledge to find it. The four don't, but they do get lucky and encounter monkeys occasionally. Ruprechter decides they'll eat meat that day and raises his shotgun to his shoulder, drawing a bead on a monkey. Stom objects, not wishing to kill any animals unless they absolutely have to. The group quickly turns on him. This is what they must do for survival. Undaunted, Ruprechter once more raises the shotgun and squeezes the trigger. The monkey falls, fatally injured and bleeding profusely. Stom rushes to the monkey and, to the shock of everyone, pulls out his first aid kit in an attempt to save the monkey's life. Ruprechter violently shoves him aside, scolding him for wasting their medical supplies on a dinner. He then takes the monkey and throws it on Ginsberg's back, tying the hands around his neck. The group pushes forward, moving until nightfall, as Ginsberg's shirt becomes covered in the monkey's blood. At camp that night, Ruprechter lights a fire and roasts the monkey, burning off the fur. Next is the meat, which he cuts up into equal parts so the group can share. Stom, however, refuses to eat the monkey, and the group turns on him, calling him weak and useless. Eventually, Stom accepts the meat and tries to eat it, but ends up vomiting it back up. Later, Ginsberg would come to regret the treatment of Stom. The Swiss man was one of the most kind-hearted he had ever met. While traveling together, they boarded a bus and watched as a thief stole the expensive camera a bird-watching tourist was carrying. The tourist, having come all the way to South America to photograph the continent's exotic birds, broke down into tears. Stom approached the stranger and offered him his own camera, free of charge, so that he might complete his journey. Stom should have never come, Ginsberg thinks. The group begins to alienate Stom as they push further and further into the jungle. Though he would later regret his treatment of him, now Ginsberg begins to greatly resent the soft-hearted Swiss man, and the resentment spreads among Ruprechter and Gale. As the four push deeper and deeper into the jungle, Stom grows weaker, refusing to eat the monkeys that the other three occasionally hunt and kill. By now, though, the group is starting to have serious suspicions about Ruprechter. As they travel, they ask Ruprechter about his life, training, and the location of the gold that they're seeking. Ruprechter's stories begin to contradict each other, and the three suspicions grow by the day. With mistrust growing within the foursome, and resentment towards both Ruprechter and Stom, the group stops to take stock of their situation. Their supplies are almost completely out. They've been largely subsiding on the occasional fruits and other things they can hunt or scavenge. Stom has been injured and is physically lagging behind the group on their daily pushes into the jungle. They decide it's best to turn around and head back to the village they departed from. It would be a long, difficult journey, but better than continuing with nearly no supplies and an injured Stom. Once back in the village, the group recuperates their strength and restocks their provisions. Seeking to salvage the expedition, Ruprechter pitches the group on a new plan. Instead of trudging through the thick jungle again, they could simply ride rafts down the river to a small gold quarry that Ruprechter knew about. From there, they could once more simply raft down to Rurrenabaque, a small town where they could get transportation back to La Paz. The idea of rafting instead of walking into the Amazon is very appealing to the group. Ruprechter told them he was a river guide and Gale was an expert rafter, so their confidence was high. With the help of the villagers, they build their raft and push off, floating once more into the heart of the Green Inferno. Soon, the group arrived at the confluence of two rivers, and Ruprechter suddenly called for them to pull the raft over to the shore. He warned the group of the San Pedro Canyon, a series of very dangerous rapids, boulders, and waterfalls that would be extremely hazardous to try and cross by raft. Also, he told the group that he couldn't swim, and refused to continue down the river. They had to continue on foot, he said. The group now was furious with Ruprechter. His contradictory stories and his new betrayal was too much for the group to bear. Also, as the group continued deeper and deeper into the jungle on their raft, Ruprechter had grown increasingly more authoritarian, taking leadership of the group. This was too much, and the group decided to officially split. Gale and Ginsberg decided that they would take their chances on the river, confident of Gale's rafting expertise allowing them to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. It would also make their journey to Rurrenabaque much quicker than to try to continue on foot. Ruprechter, furious at the expedition's cancellation, decided he would simply hike back upriver and return to civilization. It was best, in everyone's opinion, that Stom go with him. And with a tearful hug, the Swiss man bid Gale and Ginsberg goodbye. The group vowed to meet again just before Christmas in La Paz. Stom and Ruprechter, however, would never be seen again. even after an extensive search and rescue effort. Whether they were killed by jungle animals or hostile natives or simply succumbed to disease and infection, nobody knows. To this day, nobody also knows what Ruprechter's real objectives were and why he lied to the group about the dangerous rapids and his inability to swim. Clearly, Ruprechter had an alternative goal in mind, and one he hoped to rope the other three into once they were in a position to no longer refuse. What the wanted conman's goals may have been will forever remain a mystery. Gale and Ginsberg quickly meet with the dangerous rapids that they've been warned about. Gale expertly leads the two over the turbulent waters, but then, suddenly their raft smashes into a large boulder, throwing Gale off and plunging him into the tempestuous waters. Ginsberg frantically screams for his friend, but soon he has his own problems, as the raft is pushed over the boulder and violently ripped downstream. Clinging on for dear life, Ginsberg stays with the raft as it suddenly plunges out over a waterfall. The raft smashes into pieces on the rocks below, but miraculously Ginsberg has avoided those same rocks and plunged into a deep pool. He's lost everything though, his supplies, camping gear, and even his compass. Desperate to find Gale, he tries to climb the cliff back upriver, spending the entire night doing so. The effort, however, is futile, and Ginsberg is forced to turn back. Now his only hope is to follow the river and continue with the original plan to reach civilization. This time, however, he'll have to do it through the thick Amazon jungle, and he'll have to do it with only the shirt on his back. Ginsberg has to travel over 100 miles to reach safety, and every inch of it through jungle infested with jaguars, wild boars, snakes, and venomous insects. With no camping gear, Ginsberg has to find what comfort he can on the jungle floor, which is crawling with giant cockroaches and other insects with painful bites and stings. Sleep rarely comes for more than a few minutes at a time, and when the sun rises, the temperature soars to nearly 100 degrees. In the thick, humid jungle, breathing feels almost like drowning, and Ginsberg is essentially traveling through a sauna. The constant humidity and heat wreaks havoc on Ginsberg's body. Fungus and other infections quickly take hold. Every scratch, cut, and scrape is quick to become infected. Open blisters form on his battered feet as he struggles to push through the thick jungle and closer to civilization. The blisters leak pus, and at night the worms feed on him. Ginsberg has lost 30 pounds in 2 weeks. He's covered in insect bites and delirious from lack of food. However, Ginsberg is not alone. A young native woman has been his traveling companion for days now. She's unaffected by the tortures of the thick jungle and doesn't speak any English. Like him, she appears to be lost, and even though she never says a word to him, Ginsberg feels that he must protect her and ensure she gets to safety. This feeds his resolve, keeping him from giving up even as his body is failing him and beginning to break down. If he can't save himself, then he must save the young girl. On day 17 of being lost in the jungle, Ginsberg suddenly hears the sound of an airplane. He crashes through the jungle, desperately searching for an opening in the canopy, somewhere that he can signal for help. Finding an open spot near the river, Ginsberg begins to jump up and down and wave his arms, screaming until his voice completely fails him. The plane doesn't spot him, however, and quickly disappears into a cloud bank. The crushing disappointment nearly snuffs out that last bit of will to live in Ginsberg, but then he thinks of his companion. The mute native girl is still there by his side, and she, like him, still needs rescuing. If he gives up, neither of them will make it out alive. Ginsberg plunges back into the jungle. He wills his battered and beaten body to continue forward. At one point, he fends off a curious jaguar, lured by the smell of Ginsberg's rotting flesh. The cat backs off, but Ginsberg can hear it occasionally in the nearby jungle. The cat knows the same thing Ginsberg does. Death is near. All the jaguar has to do is wait. On the 19th day, Ginsberg can no longer stand on his feet. He hasn't eaten anything substantial in over 2 weeks. Despite the overwhelming abundance of life around him, the jungle is incredibly barren unless you know exactly where to look, and Ginsberg lacks the training. He's ready to give up, but then he spots a massive colony of fire ants on a nearby tree. He knows his body needs a jolt of energy, something to get him back on his feet again, even if it's for the last time. He needs to push himself just a little bit further in hopes of rescue. His mute traveling companion is depending on him. He moves up to the tree and begins to shake it, causing the fire ants to rain down on him from above. The furious insects immediately attack Ginsberg's flesh, delivering dozens of painful stings. Waves of pain course over Ginsberg's body, but the pain also releases steroids into his bloodstream, giving his body a desperately needed jolt of energy. Ginsberg pushes back into the jungle once more, breaking through the thick cover and finally spotting a small opening by the river. This is it. He can't take one more step, and he collapses. Tears in his eyes, he apologizes to his mute traveling companion, the native girl watching him with kind eyes. While his own body is covered in pus-oozing sores and infected wounds, she is still completely untouched by the horrors of their ordeal. Ginsberg closes his eyes, blacking out. An entire day passes with Ginsberg on that riverbank, when he's suddenly awakened by the sound of a motorboat and shouting. Blinking against the brutal sun, Ginsberg barely has the strength to crane his neck and look in the direction of the sound. To his amazement, he spots a canoe, and most incredible of all, Gale is at the bow. frantically encouraging the natives he's riding with to move the boat faster. Ginsburg would go on to be saved by Gale, who after getting thrown off the raft was swept to the riverbank. There he stayed, looking for Ginsburg before being rescued by 2 native hunters. Once back in the village, he organized the rest of the villagers to launch a search and rescue effort lasting almost 3 weeks. Incredibly, the group would find Ginsburg and bring him back to civilization, where he'd spend 3 months in recovery. As far as Ginsburg's companion, the mute indigenous woman he traveled with, there would be no evidence of her ever discovered. Ginsburg himself, however, refutes that she was merely a hallucination brought on by starvation, illness, and stress. Who or what she may have been still remains a mystery. Now go watch Man Shot in Spine and Left for Dead in Amazon Jungle, or click this other video instead. 2 + 2 = 4.